Hello and good evening, everyone, and welcome to Black Futures, a Northern Caucus. My name is Shayna. My pronouns are she, her, and elle en français, and I'm part of the board of Black Lives Matter Sudbury. Before we get started with this panel, we would like to acknowledge that BLM Sudbury is located on the unceded territories of the Anishinaabe, specifically in Swakamock, which means where the three roads meet in Anishinaabe-Moan. This area was later renamed Sudbury by settlers who came to these lands. This is Robinson-Huron Treaty Territory and is the home place of the Tikmashing Anishinaabeg and the Wanapate First Nations. This treaty territory is also home to the Oji Cree, Mishkegowuk Cree, Algonquin, and Métis peoples. I want to acknowledge that the people who have and continue to live on these lands have resisted, in many ways, shapes, and forms, colonial violence that permeated this country for centuries and continue to thrive even within neocolonialism, actively engaging in efforts towards decolonization and striving for self-determination. Here at Black Lives Matter Sudbury, we recognize that reconciliation does not begin and end with a simple land acknowledgement. We must work to actively decolonize spaces and uplift Indigenous ways of learning and knowing. In addition, we must all aid in the ongoing battle for Indigenous sovereignty, access to clean drinking water, and seek justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit individuals. I would also like to acknowledge the legacy of slavery in this country and the enslaved African people whose labor was exploited for generations to help establish the colonial lands we now call Canada. Slavery existed in this country until 1834, and it is essential to recognize how the history of this country is complicit in racist and white supremacist systems. We must also acknowledge that the end of slavery was followed by a series of ongoing discriminatory and repressive practices and laws, effects of which are still experienced to this day. Furthermore, we want to acknowledge that though February marks Black History Month, uplifting the contributions of Black people and communities must continue every day of the year, even here on March 2nd. It is important to recognize this time as an opportunity to educate yourself, your family, and your friends on the historic contributions of Black communities on Turtle Island. We'd also like to take a moment to thank our conference sponsors. It is because of their generosity that we've been able to thrive and present important programming like this caucus within our northern community. Biographies of our panel participants and a full list of our conference sponsors can be found on our website, www.blmsudbury.ca. Black Futures, the Northern Caucus artwork was commissioned by Coyote Jonathan Akande and represents themes of Afrofuturism. So now I'd like to pass it on to our moderator for this panel, which is Isak Vaillancourt, co-founder and director of Black Lives Matter Sudbury. Our panel consists of Andrea, Vásquez, Jiménez, Hailey, Yasmeen, and MayaSpoken. Welcome, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. And without further ado, here's your moderator, Isak Vaillancourt.
Thank you, Shayna, for that introduction. And hello, everyone. My name is Isak Vaillancourt, and I'm so thrilled to be moderating this panel today. Our panelists have all engaged in such meaningful work relating to the Policing Free Schools movement on Turtle Island. And I'm really looking forward for our viewers today to learn more about the organizing work that is being done and why we should all be advocating for policing free schools within our respective communities. As a starting point, I would love for each of our panelists to introduce themselves and to highlight their connection to the Policing Free Schools movement. And Andrea, you're right beside me on my screen, so would you mind going first?
Yeah, sure. And so humbled to be here alongside, community powerhouses. So hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Vásquez Jiménez, gender pronoun she, her, hers. I'm founder, director, and principal consultant of Policing Free Schools. We're based in what's colonially known today as Toronto, Canada, Toronto, which are the traditional territories of the original peoples of these lands, the Mississaugas, the New Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, who have also called these lands home since time immemorial. And at Policing Free Schools, what we really do is provide support to community organizers, to community-based organizations, school boards, post-secondary institutions, departments of education, to really work towards the removal of police and policing in school programs, the deprioritization of police presence, while simultaneously moving towards the end of policing and carceral infrastructures, practices, policies, and logics, and culture, alongside the co-creation of transformative, healthy, equitable, liberatory, life-affirming, and healing educational spaces. And at Policing Free Schools, what we really do in regards to pushing for systemic changes, we do convene the national campaign for Policing Free Schools Canada, as well as provincial campaigns, including Policing Free Schools Ontario, with awesome partners such as yourselves at BLM Sudbury, alongside Salute Collective and many others. And at this moment, currently we're actually working on expanding with and alongside our Policing Free Schools Canada national partners, additional provincial campaigns across this colonial country, Canada. We also make part of international movement, knowing that these are not isolated and local issues, these are global issues. We work in international solidarity alongside partners in the US and the UK. And with that said, in a previous organization where I was a co-director, I was lead organizer alongside many others, such as Jane Finch Action Against Poverty, Black Lives Matter Toronto, folks who were there also since the inception, such as No Cops, among many others, in regards to the historical removal of the Toronto District School Board, the largest school board in Canada's police and school program, namely the SRO program in 2017, through a first of its kind community-led and collaborative process. And my particular entry point into this work was actually due to young people. It was due to students that were the ones that were voicing the issues of police presence within their educational spaces. And it actually came up at an education forum that we had held in the previous organization I was with at the end of 2013. And that was subsequently made part of a 3-year action plan. And that was my entry point into this continued movement, which people have been in struggle for decades.
Thank you, Andrea, for that introduction and for outlining your connection. MayaSpoken, would you like to go next?
Sure. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Maya. It's truly an honor to be on this panel with you all. I'm excited to learn myself from you too. So my name is MayaSpoken. I'm a spoken word artist and community organizer and mom. And personally, I'm passionate about using words to share my story and encourage others to do the same. And that's kind of how I got involved in this work. My personal experience in high school was severely tainted by experiences with racial bias and discrimination. And because I couldn't really find anywhere to speak about these experiences, despite being very vocal when they would happen in school, I decided to just be vocal about my experiences through spoken word, as well as through threads on social media. So during the pandemic and after the murder of George Floyd, some of my threads started to resurface again, and I decided to start trying to address racism within education and within so-called Ottawa with a petition. So the petition was essentially to have an investigation done into the racism that was occurring in schools here. After I had begun sharing my story, I started receiving a lot of other stories from other students and other people in the city who experienced racism as well. And so I wanted something to be done to address this and to really get in writing the recognition that this is happening to us. So that petition received over 100,000 signatures, and still we didn't get that investigation. But I did get to connect with a Salute Collective. Shout out to Hailey, who is on this panel as well. And I'll give Hailey a chance to really dive into a Salute Collective and the incredible work that's being done there. But with the Salute Collective, I was able to support in organizing towards the removal of SROs from so-called Ottawa schools.
Thank you so much, Maya. And Hailey, would you like to introduce yourself and outline your connection to this work?
Yeah, Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to be speaking alongside all of you. I've organized with all of you and just like learned so much from what you brought to the Policing Free Schools movement. But yeah, my name is Hailey Yasmeen. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a member and co-founder of a Asilu Collective, which is based in so-called Ottawa on the traditional and unsurrendered, so stolen territories of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe, who have been living there for time immemorial. Yeah, and it's important for us to, constantly consider the impacts of policing, particularly policing free schools, as it's relevant to this panel and this discussion on Indigenous folks whose land that I personally occupy as a settler. But yeah, Asilu Collective was founded in 2020. The catalyst for the formation was the murder of George Floyd, which of course was really impactful around the world, across Turtle Island especially. It catalyzed a lot of abolitionist demands for the defunding of the police in different cities, especially across so-called Canada. And then of course, seeing the murders of folks like Regis Korchinski-Paquette, Chantel Moore, and other folks around the same time that George Floyd was tragically murdered. And so thinking about how policing was impactful, not just looking south of the colonial border in the US, but also thinking about how within these borders of Canada, how policing is so it's so violent, it's so rooted in white supremacy and the history of genocide against Indigenous peoples. It is rooted in the history of enslavement of people of African descent. And we can't forget that this is happening in Canada. And so that sparked Asilu Collective's formation. We started with a petition and then moved in towards our our Cops Out of Schools campaign, which was about a year long. And in spring of 2021, we were successful in ending the formal police in schools program that was called the School Resource Officer Program. So that was a huge win for us. It was a huge win for people who had been doing this work in Ottawa, particularly parents, Black parents, racialized parents who had been voicing these demands for decades because of experiences that they've had themselves or experiences outside of the school environment that they've had, and knowing that policing is not sustainable for our survival. So that's where I have entered the work. I've been really gracious to have been learning so much from Andrea as Asilu Collective organizes under the banner of Policing Free Schools Canada-wide, and being able to connect with organizers like yourself, Isak, and people across the country, and just being able to strategize amongst one another and see what has worked in some cities and what has not worked in others. So that has been really great. And yeah, connecting with Maya and being able to learn from one another and organize with each other throughout our campaign has been really important. And then just finishing up, since the termination of the SRO program in 2021, Asilu continues to organize as we pivot towards policing free schools rather than just thinking about police free schools, which I'm sure we'll dive in more throughout this discussion. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Hailey. And yeah, it's so awesome to be sharing virtual space with you all. I feel like we've all connected over email. So it's really nice to kind of be here all together right now. And it's quite evident that we've all deeply considered what safety really means for our school communities. And I can't wait to hear more about these interconnected systemic issues here at hand and how we can all mobilize for police-free schools and futures. For the past year and a half, the team here at Black Lives Matter Sudbury has been working to collect data from our community in order to provide insight into the SRO programs here in Sudbury, which operate within our schools. So now I would like to provide a quick overview of our research, and afterwards I'll have a few discussion questions for our panelists, and then we'll wrap up with a Q&A from the audience. A reminder for folks who are watching on Zoom webinar, you'll have the opportunity to use the Zoom Q&A feature. And for folks who are watching on Facebook Live, please feel free to paste your comments in the chat and we'll try our very best to get to them. And now I'll ask that we share the slideshow. Perfect. Thank you, AJ. So I have a very short presentation titled Policing Free Schools, a community-based exploration of the impacts of the SRO programs within the greater Sudbury area. And we can move on to the timeline slide. Thank you. So here is a timeline of our work. We've been tackling this work since the spring of 2021. And during this time, we had lots of conversations and opportunities to hear first-base accounts from grassroots organizations across the country who had conducted community-based research on the presence of policing within educational spaces. As Black Lives Matter Sudbury is an organization rooted in abolitionist and equitable values, our team of volunteers were highly compelled to further investigate the impact of policing within secondary institutions in the greater Sudbury area. In the summer of 2021, we officially began the Sudbury Policing Free Schools initiative. In the fall of 2021, we launched our community consultation process, which I'll speak to more in a few moments. And in the spring of 2021, we started compiling this research, and of course, we followed research ethics protocols to ensure that best practices were employed throughout the data collection process to protect each individual respondent. And here we are now in winter of 2023, and we are finally ready to distribute our findings across the community, officially starting today with a quick executive summary. So we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So our team collected rich qualitative and quantitative data from elementary, secondary school students, parents, staff members, and community members in the greater Sudbury area. And this includes Espanola, Massey, Manitoulin, and Marks Day Warren. And this took place through an accessible online survey. The majority of questions were purposely open-ended to give participants the freedom to speak to whichever experiences they saw fit as it relates to policing in school environments. We received a total of 84 submissions, and to best understand where each participant is situated and their experiences, the survey was designed to collect some demographic-related data along written testimonials. And respondents were largely students, 45%, followed by parents, 21% followed by community members, 12% followed by school staff members, 7%. And of the 84 respondents, 42% identified as 2S LGBTQIA+, 27% identified as Black, Indigenous, or racialized, and 15.5% reported living in poverty. And we can move on to the next slide now, please. Thank you. And now I'll provide a really quick overview of our results. We identified 4 major themes, the first being a lack of transparency and accountability. Prior to starting the community consultation process, our Policing Free Schools team spent around 2 to 3 months conducting exploratory research to learn more about the existing structures and the presence within the greater Sudbury area. And despite thorough searches of school board resources, municipal archives, and Greater Sudbury Police Services online databases, we quickly identified that there was a lack of information or even data outlining the role that police had in our schools and the impacts of these SRO programs. And this lack of public knowledge regarding SRO programs seemed extremely evident among our respondents' testimonials as well. And participants seemed to further question the presence of SRO programs and why police even have the role that they do within school environments. Secondly, impact on learning environment. Students feeling safe and comfortable in schools is a key aspect to providing an optimal learning environment, where adolescents can feel a sense of belonging, can feel a sense of community, and are able to thrive both academically and socially. And our survey found that respondents reported a significant impact on their learning environment, mostly relating to their comfort in educational spaces when school resource officers were present. Our participants indicated general discomfort, along with mentions of fear and endangerment, citing that police presence discouraged them from attending school. Respondents to our survey described negative personal experiences, as well as witness accounts where SROs inappropriately interacted with students, making them feel unsafe or making others feel unsafe. Thirdly, criminalization of students and systemic discrimination. Alongside mentions of how police presence impacts students' education and learning experience, several participants shared concerns and experiences regarding discrimination and being targeted by police within their secondary schools. And this criminalization of students, especially students struggling with mental health, was a concern mentioned numerous times in our survey. And these testimonials clearly illustrate a palpable fear concerning the targeting of marginalized students and how this translates into their lives inside of school and also outside of school as well. They also describe the ways in which systemic discrimination and racism are felt in schools by Black, Indigenous, racialized students, by 2S LGBTQ+ students, and by students with major affective disorder. Lastly, impacting well-being in schools, common narratives around policing often invoke ideas of safety and protection, which is not what is not often discussed in this narrative around safety is those who have previous experience with the judicial system and are aware of the institutionalized and systemic bias of policing. Police are not a welcome presence for those folks. And as respondents have shared, communities with historic displacement, war, and conflict, and those who are Black, Indigenous, or from other marginalized groups, such as queer students, people who use substances, and those experiencing mental illness, police present is the exact opposite of safety and protection. Respondents also noted that in order for children to be safe at school and to promote learning, police should play no role in the school community. So I'll leave it at that for my presentation today. We can stop sharing the screen now. And we basically are going to have a 10-page report which goes into detail and further outlines everything I've mentioned with supporting literature, testimonials, references, and all that good stuff. And this report will be circulated with everyone who registered here today. So y'all will be receiving an accessible PDF copy in your inboxes once it becomes available. And now, enough of me talking. I am sick of talking. I would love to hear from our panelists, and I have a few discussion questions for y'all. So the first discussion question that I have is, can you speak to the ways in which these policing structures impact Black, Indigenous, or racialized students/youth? And Andrea, again, you're the first on my screen, so I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, and for that question in particular. And so, wanting to really ground this space as well, and prior to delving into this and connecting us to answering this question, right, it's really important to ground what we mean by when we say police and policing free schools. And so ourselves and our partners, we take up our US-based national campaign partners, Alliance for Educational Justice and Advancement Projects, collective campaign definition of what it means when we are rallying these outcries, and that is dismantling school policing infrastructure, culture, and practice, ending school militarization and surveillance, and building a new liberatory education system. And so it's significantly important when we take up policing free schools as a rallying call, especially when many educational spaces have continued to solely see the removal of their original police in school program and policing in school programs as the only necessary step, or that those educational spaces who actually have never had a police in school program think and believe that their job is done, even though that has never been the case. Removal of police and policing in school programs has always been a necessary step along a larger process. And there has been a continued pattern with educational spaces, leaving the root issues and the root causes intact and perpetuating ongoing harms, regardless of intention, right? And this recurring pattern is what I call the police-free schools complex, AKA police faux schools. And so when we're thinking about the ways in which that policing structures are impacting students and young people within educational spaces, we really have to foreground it in that equitable access to education is a human right, and that policing and carcerality impedes this access, right? There are multiple ways that policing and carcerality operate within educational spaces, K-12, including post-secondary and early learning centers. And this includes, but it's not limited to, police presence, right? For instance, policing carceral measures show up as seclusion and restraint. They show up as timeouts, corporal punishment, punitive disciplinary practices, streaming, technological surveillance, discriminatory dress codes, limitations imposed on and challenges to young people's bodily autonomy, among so many others. We're seeing a direct push out of students, and those particularly, again, impacted are Black, African diasporic, Indigenous, disabled, neurodiverse, neurodivergent, two-spirited, LGBTQIA+ communities, alongside those with precarious immigration status, among additional intersectional identity markers. And the way that this is impacting students is actually, very much reflective, Isak, of the research that y'all have been able to, put together through community-based ways, right? It's students not feeling welcomed, not feeling that they belong, feeling unsafe, which educational spaces actually have a professional obligation to ensure those welcoming spaces, right? We have young people are being impacted by increase in adverse childhood experiences by way of police presence, right? We're seeing accumulation towards chronic stress, chronic trauma, chronic illness, dysregulation of nervous systems, as you were speaking to, optical learning environments, what does that look like, right? And so what we're having is dysregulation of nervous systems, where students, even if in class, are unequipped and unable to learn because they're also within the amygdala, not within the prefrontal cortex for executive functioning. And so they're in survival mode. We have adultification, criminalization, surveillance, exclusion, and a particular logic that's grounded in seeing certain young people in educational spaces as disposable, as unworthy, as undeserving. And this is impacting students' access to education, their quality of opportunities, their complete life trajectory, impacting their mental and physical health, impacting academic and well-being excellence. And very much, this is a justice for students issue, which also intersects with justice for workers, because students' learning conditions ultimately are also workers' working conditions, and vice versa.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I really appreciate how you mentioned removing programs being a first step in a larger process, of course, and the distinction of being in survival mode, like that is not optimal for learning. So thank you for sharing that. Maya, would you like to go next? Same question. Can you speak to the ways in which these policing structures impact BIPOC students and youth?
Sure. First of all, thank you, Andrea, for that response. It was very insightful, and I'm just learning so much. So yeah, a lot of what I'm going to say is going to echo a lot of the same things. Policing structures in schools, they refer more to just, like your school resource officers or policing programs. These structures can look like suspension, expulsion, even detention. It's really any form of punitive measure that dehumanizes students as a response to their behavior. I always say, there's a quote that I always see on Twitter about how what we refer to as misbehavior is a communication of unmet needs. And what we're seeing is that a lot of students have unmet needs that are being met with these punitive measures. And all policing structures contribute to the school to prison pipeline. And this is a process within education where students are pushed into prisons through disciplinary policies and practices within schools that are often racist and discriminatory. And Black and Indigenous youth especially suffer at the hands of systemic racism within our schools, not only from their peers, but from faculty, in addition to navigating the stresses faced by their white peers. And when these students are facing difficulty at school, our education systems, they call for exclusion from their school communities instead of support and growth from within. And just to go in a bit deeper, so instead of care and support, they're kicked out of school. They might be banned from participating in extracurricular activities or sports. They're suspended or expelled. They might be encountered by armed police on school property instead of professionals equipped to provide them with mental and emotional support. They're pushed out from the place, where they should be receiving support the most, and they're taught that they don't belong before they're shown that they are worthy. And so a lot of studies, especially locally, have shown that Black and Indigenous students are expelled and suspended from school at disproportionate rates compared to their white peers. And we see these rates magnified even more within prisons and within incarceration rates. And before the termination of the SRO program in so-called Ottawa, it was predominantly directed towards schools with the greatest population of racialized students. And as a student from these neighborhoods and from these schools, we experienced, violence and in multiple ways on school property or within our community, maybe between students. And often the response was that, they're going to give us further policing. They're going to take funds away from maybe our sports teams and put it towards police on campus and on school. And that actually continued the cycle of violence in which ways a lot of students actually did not escape. And so these policing structures within education impact BIPOC students in ways that are very detrimental to even their lifespan. When students grow up being criminalized before, they even get to decide, I don't know, if they want to go somewhere after school, if they want to travel, if they want to do post-secondary studies, before they're even deciding who they want to be, they're policed. They're told that they belong in prison or they belong to these kind of treatments. And a lot of them either end up there or they don't make it to experience what they were actually worthy of. And so it's very detrimental to their experience. And it's why we fight so hard to make sure that that's not the experience of the youth coming up.
Thank you, Maya, for sharing that. And that quote that you shared, misbehavior is a communication of unmet needs. That is such a powerful quote. And you're so correct. Schools shouldn't promote exclusion. They should be promoting care. They should be promoting support. They should be promoting growth. So thank you for mentioning that. And Hailey, same question for you. Can you speak to the ways in which these policing structures impact BIPOC students and youth?
Yeah, thank you, Andrea and Maya, for such great answers. Again, I'm going to keep repeating this throughout the webinar, but I'm just always learning from both of you. Yeah, you're both so brilliant. And also, yeah, I just wanted to say congratulations to BLM Sudbury on the report coming out. ASILU released our own report in 2021, just at the end of the review that one of the major school boards in Ottawa was doing. So they were coming out with their report, and we wanted to, publish a community led one about our findings. And that was just this huge project. So I understand how big of a win this is for you guys. And also, it's the results that you were outlining, Isak, are just so similar. And it just shows how policing operates the same across Canada, and it has this function to oppress and to punish and to surveil and to criminalize. That is its main function, and that's how it operates. And so it's not able to be reformed. And I think just the fact that our reports have the same findings in different years and in different cities, it just really highlights that. But yeah, I think that, maybe I can speak to a little bit about the environment in Ottawa schools post elimination of the school resource officer program. So despite the fact that there's no formal policing in schools program, cops are still showing up in schools on a regular basis. And this is what youth and their families have communicated to ASILU. We've been working with a number of families over the past few years to support them as they are still being criminalized and policed by whether that's police officers or administrators, school staff, teachers. And so, cops are still being, for example, the use of them is being threatened by administrators. They're still being called in, even though it's against, school board policy, or if it's not falling under the provincial mandate. Despite that, it's a complete violation of that, and they're still being called in anyways. Or the situation amongst youth is being escalated so that it can, fall under the provincial mandate. And so that's a strategic thing that administrators are using. Very insidious, obviously, and violent. And we see criminal investigations for youth happening, and these are, youth are as young as 12 years old, that are being criminally investigated because of the claims that, teachers and administrators are making about them. and they're being interrogated. In one instance, there was a fight that broke out at a school, and one of the children was very injured, but the administrators decided to call in Ottawa Police Services to interrogate I think he was either 12 or 13, interrogate this child instead of, addressing his wounds. And so when his parents showed up, they had to take the child to the children's hospital after that on their own, because the school decided that, this child wasn't worthy of that. And they're casting this youth as deviant and unworthy of protection. And just like thinking that the police officer needs to be there to interrogate this child, also without parental presence, without administrative or teacher presence there, also a violation of so many different policies that the school board has. So cops are still very much present in schools. Post SRO program is what I'm trying to convey. And also there have been a number of different walkouts and youth-led demonstrations across Ottawa in the past few years. Palestinian students have held a walkout for the Nakba, and cops were called on them. Same for a dress code protest. Cops are called on students who are protesting, misogynistic and patriarchal dress codes. Some students were apprehended during this. And, again, it's like this constant escalation by the school board. And so this is it's really not just about the policing in schools program and the SRO program. It really is this partnership between the school board and Ottawa Police Services and other enforcement agents like bylaw or CBSA, Canada Border Services Agency, and thinking about how this all operates under the school prison nexus, because this is just so it's not really about just funneling students into this school to prison pipeline, but it's also about how the partnerships run so deep between administrators and police officers, because it makes a lot of the time their jobs easier when they're exporting what they should be doing to police officers. Some other things that have been happening is that students are being surveilled by teachers and administrators. So following them to the bathrooms, timing them because they think that they shouldn't be in the bathroom for longer than a certain amount of time. Just these atrocious violations of bodily autonomy, because they're being casted as criminally and criminals and being deviant. And yeah, again, these are youth coming to ASILU, or their families coming to ASILU and sharing these stories with us, because they're very much aware that policing is still happening in their schools. There was a walkout at Hillcrest High School last year where students were suffering under, this very racist principle. And they were, despite the fact that the SRO program had been eliminated, they were still, they had signs and they were chanting things about the school to prison pipeline and policing. They were using the word policing. They're very much aware that, policing is functioning in their schools to this day. And when we see administrators and school staff continuing this behavior, we see that, it doesn't model healthy behaviors amongst youth. So, this carceral environment is showing youth that they should interact that way with their peers, for example. And it really doesn't establish this really important environment of, solidarity that is much needed in our communities if we want to build a movement, and when we're struggling together. And it's, of course, this age-old colonial method of infiltrating communities and who are resisting policing and who are resisting colonial violence and police violence to divide and conquer and ensure that we don't have that solidarity with one another. But yeah, it's very much replicating these systems despite the fact that the SRO program is eliminated.
Thank you so much, Hailey. You mentioned so many insightful things. Policing operating the same. I wasn't surprised that the results in Sudbury were similar to the results in so-called Ottawa, this is a systemic issue. And of course, we're going to see similarities. So thank you for outlining that. And the partnerships between admin and police as well can be very harmful. So I'm glad we were able to talk about that. And, you know, reading the testimonials we received, it was really disheartening. And I think it's important for folks to remember that our work is grounded by these real life experiences. You know, these are students who are 13, 14 years old, who are going through these experiences on the day-to-day. So I think it's important to also center them in our discussion, which I think is a really good segue to our next discussion question we have. Y'all have been doing organizing work for quite some time. So the next discussion question is, what ways are activists working to move police out of schools and ensure the ongoing safety of Black, Indigenous, racialized, and 2S LGBTQ+ students? Andrea, would you mind kicking us off?
Yeah, definitely. And thank you, Maya and Hailey, Yasmeen as well. Ever always learning, you know, mutually reciprocal. This is the way, right? And so I really want to take this opportunity as well to speak to, you know, some of the pieces that Hailey had mentioned, you know, and what informs our organizing in policing free schools and moving towards liberatory educational spaces as it relates to the departure from the metaphor of the school to prison pipeline to that of the school prison nexus, right? You know, as Emily Nunez Eddy, an educator, organizer, and PhD student at Arizona State University, has really mentioned that although the trajectory that pushes students, pushes young people out of educational spaces into punishment system is linear and forward moving, it is very much more insidious and complex than what is a place forward by a pipeline. And so Erica Miners, you know, one of the earliest scholars to propose the use of the nexus, really describes it, and I'm going to just quote them because there's no other way to really say what they say. And so I quote, "Linkages between schools and jails are less a pipeline, more a persistent nexus or a web of intertwined punitive threads." Right? And so linkages of education and criminal punishment systems in a myriad of ways, including but not just limited to prisons, right? Seeing that as a nexus more accurately encompasses what scholars, you know, such as Rodriguez and Stovall mentioned as this deep relationship, you know, as Hailey, Yasmeen had mentioned, this deep relationship between educational spaces and prisons in infrastructure, policies, and practices that's really grounded in the entrenchment of white supremacy and very much carceral cultural control in educational spaces. And for us in our organizing and really, you know, co-creating healing, life-affirming liberatory educational spaces, it's particularly important in our organizing alongside and with young peoples, among many other folks within this movement, that when we are looking at the multifaceted ways that policing and carceral infrastructures actually impact students, to ensure that we're not actually, you know, asking for certain things that will actually perpetuate those harms, right? And so for us, alongside all our partners, it's ensuring that we're not doing reformist reforms that will perpetuate harms, but rather, you know, being committed to what Critical Resistance, a US-based organization, states that are abolitionist steps, right? And so abolitionist reforms are really ultimately what's chipping away and reducing overall impact, such as reducing the scale of policing, challenging the notion, as you know, as Isak, as you had mentioned also in regards to this notion that police and policing equates with safe and safety or increases, and working towards actually reducing funding to police, right? This also means that we're ensuring, you know, actively in our demands that we're not just saying, hey, trade, instead of police have social workers, right? Instead of police have psychiatrists, because we also are fundamentally aware how carceral care work and these helping professions are also fundamentally agents of policing outside of police, right? And so it really speaks to when we are demanding, of course, you know, people that are in helping professions that are reflective of our communities, of the students that they are serving in all of their totality, but as well as that actually have a track record that are grounded in anti-racist, equity, abolitionist forms of practices that are, you know, grounded in healing justice, that are grounded in healing centered engagement and practices, because if not, we may end up, you know, years later having to be like, actually, this is actually just a reperpetuation and just not under a police uniform, right? And definitely for us, as has been mentioned collectively here around solidarity, right? Connecting this work, acknowledging the multiple connections in the struggle, connecting with folks across colonial borders, and really remembering that Audre Lorde's words, right? That there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. And it's really imperative working in solidarity alongside each other to defend our wins, gain new ones, and also support other folks as we move towards abolitionist and policing-free futures.
Thank you, Andrea. Again, so much insight. I appreciate how you mentioned the school to prison nexus and kind of highlighting the intertwinedness of these issues, not just being limited to prison. And of course, I would love to hear more about how this movement is grounded in abolitionist work, and we'll be getting to that in a second. But before then, Maya, same question for you. What ways are activists working to move police out of schools and ensure the ongoing safety for BIPOC students and for queer students?
Yeah, I guess just to add to that, not only, are organizers working to remove police and policing practices out of schools, but they're also moving to, reallocate funding and support into areas that fill in the gaps for marginalized students. Where students are being policed, we want to see them uplifted and supported. And safety for students who are marginalized is about more than just removing them as treatment. We also want to prioritize the care of these students in radical ways that promotes equity within schools. We want to see access to non-carceral mental health resources. We want to see funding allocated towards, sports programming and arts programming and things that are uplifting and promote health for students. Safety includes, all measures and practices that are taken to preserve the life, the health, the bodily integrity of individuals. It's not linear. Safety can never be linear. It's a spectrum of needs that all need to be adequately addressed and supported in order to make schools accessible for youth. And we want to see those needs prioritized. And one of those ways is through funding. We want to see free access to food at school, for example. Humans in general are holistic beings with a multitude of needs. And education and schools should expand to support those needs so that students can be successful and feel safe and comfortable. So a very, very short answer for that, but that's kind of what I wanted to add in addition to what Andrea already mentioned.
Yeah, thank you, Maya. That was great. And I love that you touched on reallocating funding and supports. We need life-affirming spaces. We need radical care. So thank you so much for mentioning that. And Hailey, Yasmeen, same question for you. What ways are activists working to move police out of schools and ensure the ongoing safety for BIPOC and two-spirited or queer students?
Yeah, I can speak a bit about what a CELU collective has been doing. Of course, like our initial campaign was to remove cops out of schools and the formal policing program, which was the SRO program, our school resource officer program. Of course, this has a variety of different names when you look at different cities in Canada, and because of that, post termination of the SRO program, we have been really vigilant in ensuring that any school board in Ottawa doesn't propose to reintroduce a policing in school program under a new name and calling it a reformed program. This is what's happening in the next year. It's going to be introduced in a few months in September 2023, but this is happening in so-called Vancouver. So, this is the first thing that school boards are going to try to do. And again, this is because of those partnerships and the linkages between the school boards and the education system, which is so carceral and which is rooted in white supremacy, and policing and the actual police services that are present in a variety of different ways, whether that's for example, in Ottawa Police Services, or even, by law enforcement, CBSA, what I had mentioned earlier. So this is definitely something that we have been paying a lot of attention to, and ensuring that, when we see the agenda popping up for, that's being proposed for different school boards in Ottawa, the school board trustees, when they put the agenda forward, when they put new motions forward, we want to make sure that, we're very aware of what's happening, and that new programs aren't being reintroduced. This has been spoken about by trustees, and so we are almost like expecting that, because we know that just one win doesn't mean that it's going to be a win forever. Like, we know that they're going to constantly try to continue to police students, because that is essentially the function of the school under settler colonialism and racial capitalism. And so I think this is, that was a huge win for us, eliminating the SRO program. And I think that's kind of like the first step, because it removes so many opportunities for cops to come into the schools. Of course, we still see, as I had, spoken to earlier, we still see police officers coming into schools, but, the amount that schools, because while the SRO program existed, a lot of the time the SRO would hang around schools. And so schools are very much aware, like, this is not supposed to happen. There's no SRO linked to every school. They don't have that. They're not supposed to have that relationship anymore. And so the opportunity for police to enter schools has been reduced significantly, despite the fact that they're always trying to find loopholes, of course. And so since that has happened, ASILU has been working with a number of different families, particularly migrant families, who are trying to navigate policing in schools post termination of the SRO program. So they're trying to navigate like the bureaucracy, which is really difficult as a newcomer, as their youth are being disproportionately suspended and expelled from their schools. And so we are providing advocacy services and providing financial support in some situations, and any other kind of supports that these families are asking of us, because we know that the school can only provide so much support there. They have in the Ottawa Carleton District School Board, they have translators that they'll provide to migrant families or ESL families. That they'll provide a multicultural liaison officer, I think they're called. So someone who kind of is supposed to liaise between like the family and the school board, but in a lot of ways it just like isn't, that person is still a lot of the time operating on behalf of the school board. And so we really need someone who is coming from this grassroots background, who's coming from really like what's needed is an anti-policing, like abolitionist grounding, to ensure that these families are being supported in the best way possible. Something else we're doing to work towards policing free schools is intaking reports from youth and their families. And so this is a way that we're actually connecting with these families in the first place. So, we have this form that is available to students, and we're trying to get that circulating around as much as possible. But this is how a lot of youth are connecting with us. They're anonymously or not anonymously, depending on what they feel comfortable with, reporting incidents of policing in their schools, whether this is a sighting of a cop. A lot of the time, a former SRO that, the principal is, still besties with, essentially, or if they see a former SRO in their schools, or if, there's suspensions and expulsions happening, that should not be happening in amongst their peers. They can report that to us, and that's how we actually were able to support students at Hillcrest High School just a few months ago. And so this has been really important for us to, I know Maya kind of mentioned filling in gaps. Like, I think a part of like providing these supports is us filling in those gaps as best we can as community members. And another way that we've been doing this is through like a radical reading club, and ensuring that students are kind of armed with knowledge about abolition, and then hopefully in the future moving towards praxis and actually using that knowledge to do skills and knowledge sharing, and almost like an extension of the book club, and putting that theory into practice in their school. So like, what do you do when you see a cop in your school? What do you do when you see your friend being suspended? What do you do when a cop is called on a student, or the bylaw officer is, giving a fine to your friend? What can we do practically with youth to ensure that they know that they have the power amongst each other, to actually like resist policing in their schools. So that's something that's really important for us, and we've been really emphasizing political education post termination of the SRO program. And we've found it to be really empowering for a lot of youth. So that's been really nice to see.
Thank you, Hailey. It's always great to hear about all the amazing work that Asilo is doing. The advocacy work for migrant families too is really important, so I'm glad you were able to mention that. And as you mentioned, it's important to have an abolitionist grounding and how this would operate in practice, which I think is a really great transition to our next question, which is, how do you see the Policing Free Schools movement being connected to the overall defund and abolitionist movement? We've mentioned there are interconnected issues to larger racial justice movements, and I was curious if we could highlight them a bit. Andrea, would you mind going first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for this question. Fundamentally so important, right? I definitely want to echo some of the pieces that Maya had mentioned, which are of significant importance, right? When we're continuing to see across so-called Canada, whether it be at the federal level, provincial level, or city council level, and otherwise, right? We are currently in a time where federally there are, prioritizing profit over people. Provincially, there is a prioritization of decimating community-based support systems, a commitment to legislating poverty, a commitment to ballooning funds, funneling funds into prisons and policing, right? Like even just right here in Ontario, public documentation showing that there are billions of dollars going into the expansion of prisons. There are many more millions of dollars expanding, towards police within their respective municipalities in regards to grants. We have actually also seen grants for the first time, public documentation by the province of Ontario that they're actually funding police in school programs. They are actually funding police as educators. They are funding police as mental health workers, right? And so what we're really seeing is also at city council level, right? Ballooning budgets for policing, while again, decimating what I had mentioned before, community-based support systems. Really, there's lack of political will to actually addressing the root causes, addressing the social and structural determinants of health and equity. And rather, there is this ongoing prioritization of policing and carceral measures over what actually the majority of people have been calling on for. And that is defunding policing and carceral measures. And actually, going in regards to what is actually evidence-based. And again, that is ensuring that we have further investments into ample supports and resources, not more policing and carceral measures. And we also, in regards to policing, police-free and policing-free schools organizing is ultimately part of the abolition movement, right? This is our particular entry point. This work inherently is abolitionist work, right? And as organizers, we have a shared core belief. And that shared core belief is we believe removing police and policing from our schools is a seed for removing it from our communities. Right. Therefore, like abolition, which is a practical organizing tool and a long-term goal that is deep in critical resistance, that is grounded in abolition, what critical resistance organization has really taught us. And so educational spaces for us are a site of struggle. They are a site for abolition. And again, this is our particular entry point into the abolition movement, and to show that abolition is possible with the ongoing community-led wins and our ongoing struggles, right? We follow in the steps of the late human rights and civil rights activist Ella Baker around collective power building, knowing, and I quote them, that group-centered leadership, we all have a role to play. Collective power shares space and power, right? And this movement really does have a space for each and every one of us, right? Our work at Policing Free Schools alongside our partners really much grounded in, what Miriam Cab and Andrea J. Ritchie's, Black scholars that talk to us about, life-giving versus death-making institutions, right? And I quote them, let's take money from death and put it toward life, right? Even Ruth Wilson Gilmore, Black scholar and abolitionist, right? When they're talking about abolition being about presence, not just about absence, it's about building life-affirming institutions. And ultimately as well, grounded in what a scholar Alex Vitale, among other scholars, including Robin Maynard, speak to, which is that the problem is not necessarily over policing, or as they say, or disproportionate racial policing, but rather it is policing itself. And so again, for us, ultimately, Policing Free Schools is abolitionist work.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for highlighting the connection and for mentioning collective power building. Maya, same question for you. How do you see this movement being connected to the overall defund and abolition movement on Turtle Island?
Yeah, honestly, I've been really inspired by the youth and how they have really just been pushing forward and leading the charge to just push our society to be more curious about what happens when we care for people instead of policing them. The youth are healing, they're learning and they're unlearning. Myself, I've been connected with a lot of individuals who are focusing on gentle parenting, for example, and there's just so much work that connects gentle parenting and abolition that I've seen in the abolition movement. Youth are not only demanding change within discipline within schools, but also in forms of parenting and just how we care for each other. Gentle parenting is something that I've started to integrate into my own parenting styles with my daughter, and the healing journey along that has been absolutely incredible. And just watching the youth, and again, I'm going to keep repeating how, misbehavior is the communication of unmet needs. And the way that the youth are organizing is placing pressure in our society to meet what we call misbehavior with care instead of cops. People are struggling to pay rent. They're struggling to buy groceries and survive because of issues with finances. And people are starting to realize that in order to deflate a police budget, you have to defund other areas of funding within our city, and those areas are community care. The money is there to cover our needs, and it's just not being given to us. It's just not being put there. And so I really admire how the youth are encouraging people to be a bit more aggressive and unafraid to speak up for these needs and to demand better from our municipal governments. Defunding and abolition has grown to be more than just removing police again. It's about identifying community needs and addressing those instead. And so it's been really encouraging, again, to see the youth leading that, to see that integrated into the overall defunding and abolition movement, to see more people who maybe were afraid of the word abolition using it now. It's been great to see, and I think that the youth have very unique ways of expressing that to people who might not have gotten the message otherwise. I'm hearing it in spoken word, I'm hearing it in music, I'm seeing it through dance, I'm seeing it in all forms of art, in academic spaces as well. And so, yeah, it's just been exciting to see.
Thank you so much, Maya, and for sharing your experience with gentle parenting and that connection to abolitionists and that connection to a healing journey. And I echo what you're saying. It is so empowering to see youth just really advocating for what we need, because honestly, we know best, right? And Hailey, Yasmeen, same question for you. How do you see this being connected to the overall defund and abolitionist movement?
Yeah, I just want to like echo what Maya was saying again about youth leading the movement. Like I think like when I say that ASILU is supporting youth in so-called Ottawa, I really mean that. Like we are supporting them and they are leading in their schools, and they're actually the organizers who are mobilizing their peers in their schools because they know the material conditions in their schools best. They know what is going to make themselves feel better and do better in school and live a healthier life, and what essentially is going to keep them safe. And that is policing free schools. So you know, we really can't forget the youth arm of the abolitionist movement because they're our future, and yeah, they have to be part of our struggle, and that's also how youth learn and grow, by you know, taking a leadership role in this and really you know, being active participants and not just, you know, bystanders. Yeah, and they're the experts in their own material conditions, and then also just kind of adding a bit onto what Andrea said about collective power, like building people power is, I really think, how policing free schools Canada-wide has been able to sustain such a mass movement, and how we've had so many wins, and how we have been so successful in removing cops from schools across different cities. Like Andrea being able to connect us all and you know, actually be like the facilitator of that has been so great, and I'm really grateful for that, and her presence in the Policing Free Schools Canada wide movement. But yeah, people building people power building and doing this as a collective is just so important, and just thinking about how policing free schools has been such a big part of the abolitionist movement. Like a lot of those wins that we see that are abolitionists are coming from our organizing, and that's not something that we should forget. But yeah, to answer your question a bit more broadly, like we're a part of this movement because, you know, when we envision a liberated future, we're envisioning you know, policing free completely. So that doesn't mean just removing cops, but it means like policing in all forms, and that's essentially what abolition is about. It's creating a liberated future, and that also means a liberated education system. So we're definitely you know, really intrinsic part of this movement, and I'm really grateful for that.
Thank you so much, Hailey, Yasmeen, for outlining the ways, outlining the connectivity of it all. So I think now would be a really wonderful time to turn it over to questions we received from the audience. So we received one question about community-led wins within what we currently know as Canada. So I was wondering, would any of our panelists want to talk about their experiences with wins and how that felt? And I know we had an opportunity to touch on it earlier, but if we could kind of get into it a bit deeper. I know, Andrea, you have experience with this. I know, Hailey, you also have experience with this, so feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I can start us off. Yeah, like I said, ASILU had our first big win in spring of 2021. I think we can think of that as like a big win. That's why I phrased it that way, because we've had so many little wins along the way of our Cops Out of School campaign. And we even see little wins here when we're doing like advocacy work with migrant families. Like those are wins, like, you know, when we're like supporting a family and they, you know, even express, you know, that they're grateful for us to be around, or, you know, when youth are, you know, able to successfully like express demands towards like their school board, you know, the Hillcrest walkout that I keep referring to, like their principal is no longer their principal, the one that was, you know, being so violently racist to all these Black youth, you know, that is a win. So there's just so many different wins that we've been part of, and it has been so amazing. But the big one was in spring of 2021 when there was no more school resource officer program. A motion was passed by the OCDSB school board trustees, and that was just, after it was about a year of organizing, like that just was like this huge sigh of relief. We took a few months off after that. We were just like so burnt out, which reminds us of how sustainable we really need to make these movements so that we're not constantly burning ourselves out. But yeah, something I wanted to say is that it's really important to emphasize how this is a community-led win. And it's not something that the school board trustees can claim. This was us. The reason that there is no SRO program anymore in so-called Ottawa is because of us. It is because of the youth and the parents and the educators who were leading this movement. It's because of how everyone showed up at the Ottawa Carleton District School Board's community consultation with our demands, with our policing free schools demands. That was just weeks and weeks of doing that. It's because community actually showed up, and this is not the benevolence of the school board, despite how they may frame it. And so that's really important when we think about these wins, because they will try to claim those, and they will try to say that they are the change that's happening within the system, and we know that's not true. It is abolitionist leaders and abolitionist movement organizers who are actually struggling and gaining these wins. And the only way we can continue to have these wins is through organizing. We just need to organize.
Thank you so much for that, and thank you for emphasizing it's a community-led win. It changed within the system. I mean, sounds interesting, but Andrea, do you want to talk a bit about the Toronto District School Board and that win, or is there anything else that comes to mind for this question?
Yes, Hailey was talking, I was like, yes, and yes, right? Yeah, 100%. The Toronto District School Board, once again, even prior to my entry point into this type of work, there were folks such as Jane Finch Action Against Poverty. There were folks such as, this organization called No Cops. There are young people, students themselves organizing, demanding the removal of this particular police and school program. And there are multiple names to them, but this one particularly, the SRO program at the Toronto District School Board, and so in regards to our entry point, my particular entry point at the Toronto District School Board, so grateful and very much humbled to have been able to work alongside folks such as, again, Jane Finch Action Against Poverty, folks from Education Not Incarceration, folks such as Black Lives Matter Toronto, among many other peoples, parents, educators, guardians, caregivers, students themselves leading this charge. And so it very much was a decade-long win, right? And so what we're actually seeing at the Toronto District School Board was a community-led and collaborative process, right? It was being at the tables with senior staff and leadership in regards to, ensuring that there is an equity lens in regards to data, because we know, when data is taken, there are three major outcomes, regardless of where the data is taken up in across so-called Canada. And that is that the majority will state that they feel safe and or indifferent, and that the numerical minority will state that they are very much negatively impacted, right? So when we're taking a human rights-based and equity lens approach, this is what ultimately brought and ensured the Toronto District School Board moved in a way that was in alignment with human rights and equity. So many big ups to so many folks that organize around this win, and definitely want to highlight the community-led wins across, what's colonially known today as Canada, right? Such as the Winnipeg School Division and the Louisville School Division, which was, foregrounded, community-led by partners such as Police Free Schools Winnipeg, right? There were wins at the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board by partners, Hamilton Students for Justice. We're seeing a win in British Columbia previously in 2021 as well, the New Westminster School Board, which they actually made the decision to not perpetuate and, ongoing harms and trauma on students by way of, continuing with their review. They actually were the first school board which made a precedent by saying, you know what, there's more than enough research, there's more than enough evidence and reports to move forward and actually uphold human rights and equity and remove their police and school program, which theirs was called the Child and Youth Liaison Officer Program. We see further wins in, Waterloo Region District School Board here in Ontario by Students for Inclusive Schools, by African Caribbean Black Network of Waterloo Region, among many individual powerhouses as well. Hailey, Yasmeen mentioned around Isilu Collective and countless others organizing at the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. And there are many additional wins. And I think what's particularly important when we're talking about community-led wins, and Hailey, Yasmeen had mentioned this previously, was in regards to how these educational spaces, systems, rewarp and kind of like a GPS route around, hey, we'll just bring back what Hailey, Yasmeen had mentioned in Vancouver, with the win there by cops out of schools, organizational partners, among others, there is now attempts to bring back a reformed and revised, a revised and reimagined, this reformist sense that, oh, if we only fix certain pieces, it'll all be fine, right? And so what we're seeing in these community-led wins, there is also a lashback, right, around, but what we know is that it is in solidarity that we will win. And we're also very much grounded in what Angela Davis states, right? And I'm going to quote her here. What we manage to do each time we win a victory is not so much to secure change once and for all, but rather to create new terrains for struggle, right? And so ensuring that we have these new terrains, these new landscapes for struggle, it means that working in solidarity side by side, that we will win and we will move towards a policing-free schools Canada.
I'm just like nodding my head so hard, like everything you say. That is wonderful. Thank you, Andrea. And Maya, is there anything that you'd like to add to that? We also have one more question from the audience before we wrap up. So.
No, I honestly don't have anything else to add to that. Both answers were incredible, and to be a part of the work that Isilu is doing and to witness all of the incredible work that's been done just across Turtle Island has been really incredible. So yeah, nothing to add from me.
That's great. And we have one more question. We have 3 minutes left, so maybe I'll give 1 minute to each of y'all. So the question that we received from a participant, as a parent, how can I support the policing free schools movement in Northern Ontario and in Ontario as a whole? So I'm curious, where would be a good entry point for a parent? Andrea, would you mind just kicking us off?
Yeah, 100%. If we could drop down in the chat, I sent the Policing Free Schools mailing list. You'll be able to be plugged into whether it's at a national scope, provincial scope that you'd like to organize, and definitely reach out. That way we'll be able to connect you with folks who may be already organizing locally within your respective region, because what we know is that the national is grounded in the local. And I also actually want to highlight what Maya had mentioned, which is really important in regards to this connection around how parenting, there are forms of parenting as policing, right? We see this through control, we see this through, many similar ways that are practiced within educational spaces are practiced at home. So another way to enter into that space is exactly what Maya had mentioned around how is it that we're connecting, whether it be as parents, guardians, caregivers, or just adults that parent in many ways without biological children. But how is it that we are co-creating spaces that are liberatory in our homes and elsewhere, and making those connections into educational spaces, even prior to K-12, because policing carceral measures are also happening in early learning centers as well. And so definitely multiple ways, and yeah, looking forward to connect.
Thank you, Andrea. And Hailey, Yasmeen, same thing for you. As a parent, where is a good entry point to get involved with this movement?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just echo what Andrea said, like, and a really good entry point is trying to see like what folks are doing in your community already, and joining them. Um, what we were speaking to earlier is about building people power. If you're going up against this school board, um, as just like a single parent or just as like your family unit, or if it's your child trying to go up against the school board on their own, this is such an isolating process, navigating the bureaucracies of the school boards, the violence that a lot of the time that people who interact with school board trustees or principals that they experience, like the different forms of racism and gendered oppression that they're experiencing, which ASILU witnessed throughout our No Cops in School campaign. This is something that contributed to a lot of like our members' burnout, because we were constantly attending these meetings with these school board trustees and school staff members who were completely dismissive of our experiences, who were dismissive of the reports that youth were providing about policing in schools and the detriments that it was causing to them. So people power is just so important. Like the reason that folks are having wins across so-called Canada and across Turtle Island is because because there is that solidarity amongst so many different communities in their city. With the win in so-called Ottawa that ASILU was supporting the lead on was done in coalition with so many other grassroots organizing groups, including, CPEP, Criminalization Punishment Education Project. We also were organizing with Coalition Against More Surveillance, and so many other groups who were, Ottawa Black Diaspora Coalition. I'm just like keep remembering these different groups who were, joining the charge and the struggle. So it really is important to build that power, and if there isn't something happening in your community already, as a parent, reach out to other parents, see if like they're experiencing the same thing as you. It's all about building, that solid base before, you go up against these really oppressive structures.
Thank you so much for that. And Maya, same question for you before we wrap up. As a parent, how can someone support this movement?
Sure. So just to echo everything that's already been said, this isn't a fight that you should fight alone. So definitely find your community and look to remove policing practices within your own journey of parenting and replace them with communication and care for those unmet needs. The more you affirm your child's worth through the removal of policing practices within your parenting, the more they will be more comfortable to speak up for themselves when they are in schools, and to speak to you about what they're experiencing. So that journey of healing, I implore you to take, and just be curious about where it will take you. And again, find your community. And if you don't see that community out there, if there's no groups there, don't be afraid to be the person to start it.
Thank you so much. And thank you to our amazing panelists. I could stay on Zoom literally all day and just listen to y'all speak. But unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. So I will pass it over to Shayna for our outro.
Thank you so much, Isak. And thank you, Andrea, Hailey, Yasmeen, and Maya. And thank all of you for being part of this space and cultivating this discussion in such an honest, interesting, and inspiring way. We really appreciate your contributions to this caucus and the important work that you do. I sincerely hope that everyone watching enjoyed themselves, as well as a big thank you to all the volunteers who help make these conversations possible. Please join us for our next panel, Zagadwin, Black and Indigenous Solidarity, the Teaching of Love, on Tuesday, February 28th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. As well, don't forget to check out the Grow and Flow Dance Workshop tomorrow, Monday, February 27th from 6 p.m. to 7:30 at MacEwan School of Architecture. It will be delivered in French, but all are welcome to attend and to move. For more Black Futures Week information, please consult our website, www.blmsudbury.ca, and stay tuned to our social media. Thank you again to our sponsors, Black Lives Matter Canada, Blackbird Studio, Cambrian College, the Canada Council, Canadian Mental Health Association, Sudbury Manitoulin, Canadian Race Relations, Centre de Santé Communautaire de Grand Sudbury, the Centre Victoria pour Femmes, Coalition to End Violence Against Women, Compass, Copy, Future North, Futur du Nord, the Government of Canada, Laurentian University, MacEwan School of Architecture, Mental Health and Addictions Program of Health Sciences North, and Swakamock Native Friendship Center, the Nicola Fillery, Papaya Pops, Public Health Sudbury and Districts, Réseau Access Network, HIV, Hepatitis, Health and Social Services, Services sociaux et de santé pour l'hépatite et le VIH, Taylor McNally, Yes Theatre, YMCA of Northeastern Ontario, and YWCA Sudbury. In the spirit of the conference theme, Black Futures, learn from the past, take action in the present, and build the future. Thank you for joining us and have a splendid rest of your day.